woods on the back. I got sheep. That's what I want. So. I'm gonna tell you.
If you get chickens and find yourself a chimney eggs, just bring them on Monday.
Well, that's what I want. We can hook you up.
I don't think so. I haven't. Bear with me. How about that? Kids are settled. Organized. Just gotta be organized. Agenda go. Paper one. We'll just go off paper. All right, it is 5:45. I will call the meeting to order. If everybody will stand for a moment of silence and then the pledge. Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd like to welcome everyone to our May work session. I think we just pointed out that I don't know that we've had a work session this calendar year. Maybe it'd be correct. I don't think we've had a work session. So please bear with me as we go through the agenda. Not minutes since we've had a work session. So as everybody knows, or just to refresh everybody, it's we will not be voting. We'll be discussing items, and if there's the will of the board to place items in the consent agenda for our business meeting next week, but we will not be voting tonight on any of these items. If we could have the roll call, and then Mr. Schumer, our agenda.
Absolutely.
Chairperson Harrison,
Here.
Vice Chair Jeremy Burnett,
Here.
Acton,
Present.
Deborah Thomas,
Present.
Michelle Childs,
Here.
Superintendent Horrell.
Here. First item, work sessions, we do typically allow public comment if there's any interest.
None. Next item.
Next, we move to the reports section, starting with a TLN representative update.
Ms. Childs, do you have an update for us?
I do. Okay, thank goodness it's not as long as last time, but I do have a few items to go through. SB 973 HB 959 was about non-resident open enrollment. It had passed the Senate, but it was taken off notice in the House. School safety was a big agenda for Governor Bill Lee with his budget. There were several budget items that he had legislation sponsored and passed. One is SB 274, HB 322. And this one big piece of this is that the doors must be locked at all times during the school day, or fines can occur, pretty hefty fines. When I was there was a TSBA meeting on Friday for legislative representatives. It was pointed out that it's unclear right now when they say the fines will be held, if they might be released upon following what was asked of schools. Although when you do have an SRO, your first offense is a warning. Also, $140 million was added to have SROs at each public school. This will be $75,000 per school, and it will run through the Department of Safety to police departments to fund SROs at schools. There will also be school safety grants for public and private schools to apply for things like cameras, security measures. Governor Lee also had passed SB 1458 HB 983, which is a parental leave, maternity and paternity leave for 6 weeks paid for licensed school district employees upon birth, stillbirth, or adoption. Also, as far as summer learning camps, SB 0249, HB 68, and the summer learning camps came about due to the pandemic learning loss, and they were set to expire and no longer take place. But this bill funds them indefinitely or permanently at this point, and it will also include rising kindergarten, so preschoolers, through rising ninth graders. Also, as part of Governor's agenda was raising teacher salaries. SB 281 HB 329 was passed and does this, and what that looks like is $42,000, these are minimum salaries, for next school year. For 24-25 school year, $44,500. For 25-26, $47,000, and then finally, year 26-27 would be minimum $50,000. As far as the third grade retention bill, that's SB 300 HB 437. This has been a controversial piece of legislation. It was followed closely by lots of people, and at the end of the day, what did pass will not impact the current third graders. What it will do for next year's third graders is that in lieu of TCAP, the most current benchmark that is state approved, that is done in a testing environment and scored 50%, that can be used in lieu of TCAP. Also, this new bill allows school officials to appeal if the parents have given the school permission in writing for the school to appeal on behalf of the student. So for this current group of third graders, their ELA TCAP scores is what will determine or be a big factor in if they're retained or not, if they score approaching or below. But do note that the ones who score approaching and simply, or not simply, but they can attend summer camp, and if they show progress there, which is 90% attendance, and we'll find out on May 19th from the state school board what progress that looks like, then they would be done with that, and then they just proceed in fourth grade without any other interventions on that. But if they don't go to summer camp and they scored approaching, they would need tutoring all through fourth grade if they were to be promoted. The biggest thing is the children who score below, then they have to do the summer learning camp and they have to do the fourth grade tutoring, and they have to show progress in both. And finally, the governor has asked for a special session about gun legislation that might be at the end of May. It may or may not impact schools, so I will report on that if that occurs and if it relates to education.
Anybody have any questions for Ms. Strong?
So the benchmarks, they have to be one of the approved benchmark tests that the state approves of, right? So I was just gonna look it up. I'm assuming that we use, was the MVP, formerly known as Case 21, is that what it's talking about, or is there something else we'd have to use?
That's a great question, and Michelle had asked for some of that. So that is those are formative assessments, and we do refer to them as benchmarks, formative benchmarks, but they're not the state universal screener benchmarks.
Okay.
So what they're referring to are, we use Easy CBM,
Right.
is the one that we use, and all the students do it, and that's how we flag students for intervention. The other popular one is AIMSweb, that is also a state-approved benchmark. There is some, I'd say, confusion or conversation over whether both would be approved for this context, for the third graders last year for the summer camp. Everybody had to use AIMSweb, even if you were an easy CBM district like us, so we had to scramble and figure out this new platform basically for testing, and there seems to be a lack of clarity over what that would look like.
So one thing I will point out is for the current third graders, there is a process that parents can appeal. School districts cannot appeal on their behalf, but parents can, and they can use whatever they can use as part of their appeal process, the benchmark that we're currently using. So this new benchmark situation is for next year's third graders, and I do think if there's a lot of confusion about it, but if it turns out to be one particular one, I do think there's potential for advocacy that the state consider more than one, because we had kind of already had that conversation. But again, as you know, we were reminded in our TSBA legislative meeting, until all of it's actually reconciled into state law, there were a lot of amendments on a lot of these different bills, and then what that looks like. And then sometimes the State Board of Education has flexibility in what they get to put on that. So there is a bit of confusion on it, but when it's made clear, hopefully sooner than later, but that hasn't been how it's worked this school year, I will update everyone.
Is there a budgetary impact for providing tutoring to the fourth graders that has been kind of outlined yet? Is that part of legislation to provide additional funds so these teachers will be helping our kids, tutoring them, and kind of how many days a week, or what does that look like?
You've actually approved that in the budget for 23-24. We added an additional teacher's assistant position that would be used to, between that and the existing staff,
Okay.
meet the requirements of the, they call it low ratio, high dosage tutoring that would be required for those students that either were approaching and didn't go to summer camp or were below and had to do both. So we feel comfortable that that's covered. There is it is a line in TISA that you get a certain number of funds, a certain amount of funds per third graders that fall into those categories. So.
Okay.
Oh, I meant to say too that as part of one of these bills about the summer tutoring, or the tutoring and the summer learning camps, is that going forward, it will also include tutoring for students who are, I think it's kindergarten, first and second, who are retained. Or I think it was retained or risk of retaining.
Not certain on that.
Yeah, but it is supposed to, like, that piece, it seemed like they did at least listen when everyone was saying it should start before third grade. So I know there was something for the younger grades, but there was a lot that,
The Department of Ed actually released a grant in April that's due on Wednesday for partnering organizations to provide tutoring for first through third graders. And they're looking for community-based organizations to partner with school systems to provide that. It's 36 hours of tutoring that, again, small groups, high number of hours, 36 hours as well. I know about that from another realm. That is due Wednesday from those community partners. So if Dr. Horrell hasn't heard from a community partner, it's probably not going to happen for our students.
We've already covered it in our
budget piece,
Yeah.
But that would be an add-on for some of those other school districts, I think.
What, the context for that, to my understanding, is that the board, I'm sorry, the state Department of Education set up these parameters and requirements for tutors, and they are already sensing that they are overwhelmed by the number of students that will need tutors. They've already done a one call for community organizations to put together tutoring programs, and it doesn't even come close to matching, to being able to, they don't have the capacity to tutor all of the students that need to be tutored. So,
yeah, I was gonna say, that's another issue, is that there's not enough manpower on the tutoring, and it's also been flagged that there's not enough manpower to fill the SROs. So there does appear to be funding for some of these things, but actually finding employees, like statewide, I mean, we're a small district, so we're fortunate, I think, in a lot of ways that way, but statewide, it's going to be an issue, just finding people to fill all the tutoring holes and all the new SRO positions throughout the state.
So the SRO is at every school, so including elementary schools? So would that have some potential impact? Is this like through, does it have to be, I guess, can it be an employee of the school system, or are there rules around who it has to be and how it has to be set up?
you discussed that. I think there's also some ambiguity there.
Yeah.
Michelle had some great information that it appears that the intent of the legislation that is it all right if I share what we talked?
Yeah.
It appears the intent of the legislation was that it flows through the local law enforcement office. If that is the case, and I don't want to raise any alarms about our own situation, if that is the case, it would not fund our current model, which at Lakeland Elementary School, which is a school district employee security officer, as opposed to the formal SRO, which is a current law enforcement officer. So presumably, if that happened and they said, well, we will fund a school resource officer for Lakeland Elementary, but we won't give you the funds to pay for your own security officer, then we would just about how we move forward. I myself feel like there would be a number of things that a school security officer could do, even if there was an additional school resource officer funded. But
It's possible. I mean, again, when we say what the actual public law is and what that looks like, because there may end up being flexibility because people have already flagged there won't be enough SROs hired directly from police departments. So that might be a possible, request for flexibility if it's not already written in that way.
Typically, what happens with these pieces of legislation is that the legislation gets passed and then the rulemaking starts that kind of defines what are the details, that lay out exactly how it works. So that has not started. So that should be clarifying and also offers some opportunities, child says, for advocacy in a certain direction. Because what we find is, frequently, the legislation gets passed and the context on the ground may be unclear to those who pass the legislation. So we kind of get an opportunity to share our fight.
I assume that local police agencies would not want to pull more officers off the street, potentially for safety issues, just for the public to be able to take this initiative forward too. So I'm sure there's some balance coming there.
Well, I think there is, and just, we actually discussed this when the board made the decision to fund our own security officer at LES. We had a conversation with the sheriff's office, who are great partners of ours, obviously, and said, can we have an SRO at the elementary school? And they said, we can't staff an SRO at the elementary school. And we said, what if we paid all of it? And they said, we can't staff, and I mean, we don't have the staff to put an SRO at every elementary school. So it was not so much a matter of funding, it was a matter of staffing. So when this legislation passes, what they're saying is the money will be there, but does that translate into the staffing? That would be the next level challenge, I would think.
And so in this whole, changing to third grade retention, so in this whole discussion, we talked about if they're retained or not retained. So the third graders this year, can you kind of like give what this third grade for approaching and below or whatever, what this third grade year looks like for these kids?
Yep. In fact, I was going to mention that in the superintendent's report, but it's very appropriate to do it right now. As Ms. Childs noted, the law has not changed, despite being told 2 years ago that kind of some adjustments would be made. It would get fixed in the meantime. So the law, as it is now, the third graders just wrapped up, mercifully, last week, taking their standardized tests, and the results of that third grade ELA test will come back, and we're going to been told by the state that we're going to get those raw scores on May 19th. Okay? And then we'll also get some guidance on how to translate those raw scores into the 4 designations that students get when they take TCAP tests, which is exceeds expectations, met expectations, advancing toward expectations, or below expectations. And so, and Ms. Child laid this out pretty well, very well, excuse me. If a third grader is below expectations, then they have several options. One is do nothing and be retained. 2 is go to summer learning camp, a certain level of attendance, and get the low ratio, high dosage tutoring for the entirety of the 4th grade year. If that happens, and that student obviously goes on to the 4th grade, what is unclear is when they take the 4th grade TCAP test, what happens then? If they're advancing or approaching rather, or above, or below rather, what would that mean to that 4th grader? We don't know the answer to that. They also have, well, let me go on to the next one. If they get approaching, then they will presumably be promoted and receive the high dosage, low ratio tutoring. They only have to do one or the other. They can go to the summer camp and knock it out, and they're done. We still don't know what happens at the end of the 4th grade year to that student. They can not go to the summer camp, but do the tutoring alone. That's what happens at the end of the 4th grade year. There's also an appeal there's 2 more. There's a retest opportunity where students, for whatever reason, if you think, my kids shouldn't have been in one of those categories, they had a bad day, they didn't sleep, they were sick, they didn't try hard, I've got their attention now, we want to take this test again. They can take it pretty much the next week before the summer camp starts, and if they, based on the designation, met or exceeds expectations, then they could be done. That's it. They go into the 4th grade.
Results, are they immediate? Or how does that work if the camp is next week?
Pretty close to it.
Okay.
Yeah. Because it would be digital. No, it's a good question.
Ms. Burnett had a.
And,
Yeah.
and to interject another question, so I think I read this, but I want to ask, so it's out here too. So if a student is approaching and they retest and they retest it below, which one counts, the higher or the most recent?
I have no idea. That's a
They
great question.
actually, they've never.
A great question.
Okay.
I would hope you super score it and give them
Yeah.
the higher one, but
That makes academic sense, but we're
I
not
don't know.
talking about
That's a question
academics.
for the Commissioner of Education. Oh, wait, I'll get there.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then the other
Ask her
scenario is that if the student falls into one of those two lower categories, the parent can appeal it with the guidance of the school system. And they can request, based on the results of those benchmarks that I've referred to, that say, look, yes, they didn't do well on this test, but they were in the 60th percentile on their benchmark testing all year long, including the last one, and this is not an accurate representation of your ability to read, or these things that we've been saying. So state has promised that there's a quick turnaround on that
Okay, that's what.
in 24, 48 hours. We're laughing when we're not, making ourselves crazy trying to meet all this. So in fact, I was in a meeting today and we were going over all the check marks and, basically flow charts, say what are the decisions that these parents have to make this 48 hours that happens after last day of school.
No, the summer camp will not count if they don't attend 90% and make whatever progress they decide at the state school board meeting on May 19th, which still has not been determined. But on the last meeting, they said possibly 5 percentage points, but it was unclear. Now, I did ask Dr. Horrell about just for 3rd grade ELA, could we have some possible makeup days in case a kid actually gets sick? I mean, and can't come and do 90%, because these below kids have to go. Now, I think he's gonna speak to how few below we have or anticipate having. It's mostly approaching at our district, so they have options, but the below kids, unless they want to be retained or they win their appeal, they have to show progress at summer camp and at the tutoring, well, I guess at the end of 4th grade through the tutoring process.
So if they go to the summer camp, if they choose the option, I'm gonna go to the summer camp and then I'm gonna be in the tutoring to be promoted to 4th grade, and then they don't go to the tutoring, and what?
Is that during the school day, I assume?
It's during the school day, yeah.
So they don't have a
Okay,
choice?
okay,
Yeah,
Okay.
they would be assigned the tutoring.
okay, so it's more like an intervention kind of thing,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah, that's right.
And one more clarifying question. Where's below? You said option 1 was do nothing, be retained. You're retained in the 3rd grade the following year if you don't go to the summer.
Correct.
Okay.
What if they don't score here? I mean, are
You
they
can
still?
only be retained once. The law is clear on that. In fact, what I skipped inadvertently, again, because I don't have the flow chart in front of me, there are certain categories where it doesn't matter what you scored. For example, if you've already been retained, you won't be retained. If you're in special ed categories, you won't be retained. If you're in EL categories, you wont be retained. IEP trumps everything. So if there's a IEP situation for special education students, we're gonna get the list, we're gonna pull those kids out, we're gonna let parents know that they can appeal, maybe we'll have some data that suggests maybe which ones would be good candidates for appeals. Immediately give them the opportunity to schedule the makeup test if they would, or the makeup test, not the makeup test, but the do-over test if they want to do that.
So.
Rock and roll, be a fun last day of school.
So the test that they take at the end of summer camp, is it a TCAP ELA?
Yes.
Okay, so then you are comparing the same test How do our Easy CBM results, I mean, that's actually a reading screener, right? How do the Easy CBM results compare to our ELA PCAP results in terms of predictive kind of, do they match up, or is it significantly lower with Easy CBM?
They do much better on the Easy CBM.
Because
in
it's
terms
a
of the,
reading, it's a
because
literacy
reading
screener, which
literacy
is what they're,
screener.
okay.
Yeah, the TCAP is a standards-based test.
Uh-huh.
The Easy CBM is
A reading screener.
a reading screener, essentially. So if we were using, in fact, we were proponents of this, we as a board, if we were able to use that other data off the front end, the numbers would be significantly
Right.
lower. In
Right.
fact, they'd be manageable.
I know we probably had this in some of Mr. Adler's presentation, but what is our typical percentage of versus below when it comes to third grade? Do you,
Off the top of my head, I'd have to go back. I wouldn't be able to do it.
you
I'd
don't have
go
to
back
do it
and
right
look.
now, that's
Okay.
fine. I was just curious because if you're listening out there, so this, if you look at the TCAP portal, you look at the parent portal, and they have kind of the rainbow semicircle, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, and so approaching is 2, and below is 1, and I just would be kind of curious to see how many fall in the 1, and know where a lot of our resources need to go. Obviously, a lot of our resources need to go to those kids who are, struggling with those standards and with English class, but I would also be sort of interested to see what does an actual reading screener say about the literacy of our kids, which is what the legislation is supposed to be meeting up with, but doesn't do.
Yeah, correct.
Okay. Discussion? That's probably a little much, sorry.
Well, to what Ms. Thomas said, I think that bears saying to parents, this wall of
Child can read.
inappropriately passed legislation, I'll say, that when they are frustrated with your staff, give them Mark White's phone number, give them Tom Leatherwood's name and phone number. They need to call them. Give them the governor's phone number so that they can call their legislators and their governor and express their dissatisfaction with this law that is basically a test that doesn't measure what they want to measure when we have assessments that do measure what we want to measure.
And everybody's using one or the other. I mean, there are 7 on this list, on the approved universal screeners that were approved in July of 2021. I mean, and I'm sure different school systems have the ones that they use, but Easy CBM's right there. And, I remember when my son was in elementary school, they were doing this from very, very early to try to catch these kids early and to try to figure out where do I need to spend more time to help this child learn how to read. And I'm betting that Easy CBM shows us that we should be worried about a much smaller percentage of kids about reading.
I can tell you that,
Yeah,
for sure. I mean,
right.
significantly. I don't know the numbers themselves off
Right.
the top of my head, but it's much, much, much lower.
Yeah,
And it's, and I feel like more reflective of, obviously.
Right.
And the other thing I will note, well, we can talk about it as long as I want to, but before we move on maybe, is that Lakeland School System, Lakeland Elementary School has communicated repeatedly since the start of the year with parents. We have shared data at multiple points throughout the year to basically say, your child may be in this category, or your child has scores based on the benchmarks, based on the case data. We've said this is the data, these are the numbers that the state is going to be looking for. So while I'm certain it will be a surprise to some parents regardless, there have been multiple attempts made to make sure parents are educated about this law, as Mr. Burnett says. That's
Well intentioned, poorly executed.
yeah, yep.
discussion? Right. Next item.
All right, next item is the superintendent's report. excited about that now. Probably the lead story today, which has been hitting the papers, I guess, for the statewide educational landscape, is that Commissioner Penny Schwinn has announced that she is stepping down as the Commissioner of Education after 4 years on the job, and her last day will be June 1st. And the new Commissioner of Education has already been named, and it's Lizette Gonzalez Reynolds, and she will succeed Dr. Schwinn as the Commissioner of the Tennessee Department of Education. So we're all just learning a little bit about her. She comes from a policy institute that focuses primarily on school choice. And we're not aware at this point of any experience working in schools or in public education at all. But we'll get to know her starting fairly soon, I'm sure. The other big news in Lakeland school system, as I noted, is we did conclude our state mandated testing at the end of last week. I want to thank and commend everybody who was involved in that. It was very smooth. I also want to commend, as was noted today in another meeting I was in, Pearson, who was the test vendor this year, and actually the online testing platform was very smooth and very stable, and this is the first time we've had that experience really since it started. I'm not trying to be funny, it's just factual. It's hard not to laugh, but that didn't appear to be an issue. I will note that as we get closer to the end of the year, and just a note that we've discussed, there is a state law that says if the raw scores aren't back at least 5 days prior to the last instructional day, then they are not required to count in the child's grades. And the latest indications we've gotten is that we can expect to get those grades on May 19th. We're prepared in case we get them earlier, but I'd say the probability is the highest that the TCAP and end of course scores will not count towards students' grades this year. We are prepared in case they do. They counted for some districts last year, but the likelihood is that they will not count for us, but we're prepared, and if they do, if they come back early, ready. I know the students and the teachers proceeded as if they will count, just to be on the safe side, which is the right thing to do, and for multiple reasons, but most likely they will not. But I do want to, again, congratulate our district testing coordinator, our building testing coordinators, and really everybody, because it takes everybody to make that as smooth as it was. Also wanted to note a little celebration. We posted this, but one of our teachers, Stephanie Thomas, an English teacher at Lakeland Prep, has advanced as a regional finalist for the Teacher of the Year competition, and right now that's the furthest we've had one of our Teacher of the Year applicants go, so we're very proud of her and of Lakeland Preparatory School. Wanted to note that hiring is continuing at a nice fast clip. I think it is an appropriate rate. Thanks to Ms. Millspaw and primarily Ms. Martin, who has the bulk of the positions to fill for the time being. We did have our new maintenance and facilities manager start last week, Jeremy Hayes. He's off to a great start already and making relationships and bringing things to our attention, and has really hit the ground running, and excited about that. We also publicly announced that Cody Duncan, the current Bonlin Middle School principal, will be the deputy principal at Lakeland Preparatory School next week, so we've got a lot of great feedback about him from folks that have worked with him and for him. So we're excited about that, and a number of other positions, and I'm sure there will be announcements about the other teacher positions and things throughout the summer, as we did last year. Also want to note that there has been, this will probably be the first time for the board to hear about this. There's been a lot of work on revamping our school district and school websites that's been largely driven by Dr. Terrell, but has also had a lot of tremendous input from Ms. Millspaw and many others. So we're excited to get that revamped, as well as the launch of a new communication tool called Parent Square, that is intended to consolidate nearly all district and school communication into one platform. It's a platform that's being used by Collierville schools right now, and seems to be very popular in that district, so we're excited to get that rolled out this summer as well. We will be opening it up on May 19th. We're not eliminating any of the other current platforms like Remind or other things that we use right now, but we are going to give parents who be go-getters the opportunity to go ahead and sign up and kind of get used to it and give faculty and staff the opportunity to start using it at that time. But it'll be a kind of a low-pressure situation because the coaches, teachers, folks that need to communicate in the summer will still have their traditional means to do so. I want to note, we've talked about the summer camps quite a bit already. The summer camp situation has changed a number of times quite dramatically in terms of what the expectation is for the school systems to do. We were initially told that we were only going to be funded for third graders and then for middle school bridge camps, that was the only funding we were going to get of the 3 sources of funding that we've gotten the last 2 years. It was then kind of whispered to us that we would wind up getting all the funding that we got last year. And last year, we had students in grades 3 through 8 at the camps. And they were at both schools. When we thought we were only going to have these third grade students, and then the middle school, we were going to do the whole camp at Lakeland Preparatory School. That was the plan, right up until just a few weeks ago. Then we started hearing, no, you're going to get all the funding. And then we were told you're going to get all the funding. And then we actually got the funding, and it was about $100 grand less than the funding that we had last year. So we scrambled again to kind of cut down on the number of teachers while we were asking questions, why are we having few funding? This is at the same time that the window to when we actually have to launch these camps has happened. And then they came back again and said, no, we got it. We're pleased to announce that due to collaboration, we're now going to give you all the funding. So we've literally changed this model 3 times. And I only say all this to say, our academic folks are working hard. They take it in stride. They make the adjustments. You know, if there are tears, they keep them to themselves. I wouldn't blame them, but they keep moving ahead to try to make sure that we are as prepared as we can be for these students that are coming this summer. So we are back to a model that looks almost exactly like it looked last summer, where we'll have camps at Lakeland Elementary and Lakeland Preparatory School. We talked about the 3rd grade retention law. A couple things to note. The 8th grade promotion ceremony for Lakeland Preparatory School will be May 17th. That will be during the day. It will be at Bellevue. As I've noted, this will be the last time that the 8th grade promotion ceremony will be at Bellevue. We'll move that in-house starting next year. We're also honored again to be representing Lakeland School System at the Arlington High School graduation ceremony. We have this year and 2 more years where basically the entirety of the Lakeland High School population will be graduating from Arlington High School, and that will be on May 16th. And again, we're pleased to be working with our partners there at Arlington Community Schools to be part of that ceremony. We are, just to give an update on the central office, we are working towards putting our central office bid documents out in a worst case on August 1st. We've just about finished with schematic design, kind of doing a few tweaks, and I'm going to send the board some images of that tomorrow, and possibly some elevations. There's been some work done on the exterior elevations of the central office as well, and the goal of that is still to be open by the next summer, essentially, so that we'd be moved out of Lakeland Preparatory School by the time that the 11th grade comes through. There are several projects out to bid right now, and those bids will be opened on May 2nd. Third, I'll double check on that. But those projects are the extension of Campus Drive to US 70. We also put in as alternates the widening of the on-campus soccer field so that it would move from 55 yards wide to 65 yards wide, which would make it TSSAA eligible for tournament play. There's also an alternate to pave and construct a walking path to connect the bus loop with the annex, the Lakeland School System annex, where the soccer fields are, athletic fields are. And there's also a third alternate that would greatly increase the amount of parking over at the annex, which I know is also needed. We certainly don't know if we can, from a budgetary standpoint, move forward with all of those. We know that we have to move forward with Campus Drive. That's a non-negotiable. In my mind, the extension The expansion of the soccer field is a non-negotiable. We would love to make a car path and a better walking path over to the annex, and those are the two where we're just going to have to see. Keeping an eye on that. And since this meeting started, I want to announce that the house that we own at 9605 Old Brownsville is now listed on the market. So it is up for sale. Like I said, that is breaking news. It is listed at $435,000 and sits on 5.2 acres in just a lovely part of Lakeland, close to Lakeland schools. It's zoned for Lakeland schools, and Billy Rogers is handling that listing for us. And if anybody's interested, they can check out that listing and contact Billy Rogers. It'd be a steal at $435,000. No, I'm not. Billy will sell it to you. I'm just letting you know it's on the market. And that concludes my report. I'll briefly go over the financial summary next. But first, if there's any questions or updates that you'd like.
So with the back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and maybe another time or two, it was hard to follow, but the summer learning camp situation. And I realize, I do recognize some of this was legislation that ended up being passed, but at the same time, that's just so difficult for our staff, and it's so last minute on top of the pressure with the third grade situation. I mean, do you think there's a particular person or group that, we could kind of just communicate what that was like on the ground level for, I don't know whether, we could have a write-up and explain it when we meet with our legislators, or it should be the Department of Education, but also they've turned over a lot. So I'm just trying to think through, because I do think someone needs to hear what it was actually like for people.
They do.
Okay.
I make sure that
Okay, you've already,
they know.
Okay.
Yeah, we've
Because
got
that's
liaisons
just
that,
not right. It's just not right.
I shared
mean,
that explicitly with our
Okay.
core representative and asked that it be passed on.
Okay.
Yes, it
Thank you
is
for
very
advocating
frustrating.
for our staff,
Of
because
course,
it's not, that's
absolutely.
not right.
I agree.
Any more questions?
All right.
We'll take the financial report.
Yeah, due to the timing of the last couple of meetings, we have both the February and the March financial summaries that are available. Keep in mind, I think for a lot of people, the May's kind of the end of the fiscal year, because that's the end of the school year, and it's really not. But folks get paid throughout the summer as well. But regardless, we're right where we should be. There's not any issues on the summary that Rosales or I are concerned with, but it is there for the public and the board to review. And certainly if you have any questions, I can try to get those answered for you.
Hearing none, next item.
Okay, next would typically be the approval of the agenda if this were a business meeting, and then the consent agenda, which I know that we will likely add things to during the following discussion. The next item is an executive session that was requested to have a conversation about the emergency preparedness plan for Lakeland school system. And I can either describe an executive session, or you can do it,
Either way.
Madam Chair.
Go ahead, I'll let
Okay,
you.
yeah, just so anybody's not aware, there are certain items that the board can meet basically in private, where it wouldn't be streamed, there wouldn't be minutes. And those categories are if we're discussing current or impending litigation, or by state law, we can also discuss emergency preparedness plans or anything really having to do with emergency response, just to make sure that those plans are not being broadcast. So there are a few things that the board has asked to discuss and just review, and our past procedure has just been we'll keep the stream going, so we won't be here for a few minutes, but we'd move into the conference room and just have a few minutes to run over a few of those items.
Board? All right, for the public's knowledge, we'll just come back and we'll leave the recording going.
So we'll go ahead and
as
turn our
we go
mics
to
off.
enter our
Just to
executive session.
turn your mics off. we're still,
Everybody would turn your mic back on. Okay. And we are back. I'll give Dr. Horrell a second to.
just want to look and make sure we're still streaming. I don't know if that makes a difference or not. We're good. All right.
So we have completed our executive session, and now we will move on to the discussion items. Dr. Horrell, if you would lead us through those.
Okay, the first item is the approval of the business meeting minutes from April 3rd.
Is there any discussion on this item or corrections? Any objection by the board to place this item on the consent agenda? Hearing none, if you would place this item on the consent agenda for next week. Next item.
Next item is an update to policy 6.303 on interrogations and searches. Like me too, I can go over that.
Yeah, if you'll go over the update to that.
Yes, we wanted to add something that contemplates if a student is uncooperative during a search or refuses to be searched. And it was not explicit in our board policy as to what the response would be in a situation like that. And I feel like in light of today's safety environment and school environment period, basically that I'm requesting that the board send a strong message that a student must be subject to a search. We do feel like legally, as school administrators and to carry out our duties, that we know we have the right to search students, but we also are not going to, forcibly search a student that refuses to cooperate. So the question was, what would the appropriate consequence be for that situation? So the policy recommendation here is that if students uncooperative during a search or refuses to be searched, then the administrator shall assign an out-of-school suspension, either appropriate for the policy violation which the student was reasonably suspected, or an out-of-school suspension of 45 days. That is a long suspension, but we also feel like that is a very serious violation to brazenly refuse to cooperate with a search at the request of a school administrator.
Discussion?
Have one. How does this, I'm assuming this complies with all the search requirements that are out there within law?
Yes, we
As far as
feel like
case
it does.
law?
Mr. Plumley's reviewed it, yes.
All right, thank you, sir.
Need to cross-reference this, and maybe look at policy 6.313. It's our, is that our different tiers? So I think we need to be sure that we have captured the idea of refusing to be searched in that policy in 6.313. Maybe if we can look at that and bring it back next week to business meeting. Particularly the 45 days and the insubordination or refusal to comply, if we can work that into 6.313, cross-reference them and have them say the same thing.
The only, and we should look at it, because the only challenge would be most of those are ranges that kind of gives the admin, this would be
Right.
kind of laid out crime and punishment, kind of, offense,
Okay.
consequence here, but we can certainly look at it and make sure, I think at the least it needs to be cross-referenced, because it may not fit neatly from memory into that, but we'll take a look at it. We'll bring it back and review them both.
Okay.
So I do have a question regarding it. So is this, I assume, would be subject to our appeal process, that we do have appeal processes for discipline?
Yes.
Okay, so this would, does it need to state that, or is that kind of the
No, that's built
cross-reference?
in. Any
Okay.
suspension of 10 days or more,
Okay.
the parents may appeal.
And so if a student refuses, then essentially they would get 45 days out of school suspension if they refuse, or longer. The minimum they would get is 45 days or long. And it could be longer depending on what they were suspected of.
Yeah, so basically, if you were, if we had reasonable suspicion that you were carrying and distributing drugs, and you refused to be searched, then you'd get a 180-day suspension.
And so here's, and this is kind of getting into some weeds, but let's say a student has a cell phone, right? And so they're suspected of having a cell phone, they refuse to be searched, or they had their cell phone on or whatever. That's like normally, I've heard, I don't know, but I think it was like 3 days is kind of what they're getting as far as a suspension. If they refuse to be searched for a cell phone, then they automatically get a 45-day suspension.
Correct. At that point, you're being suspended for the refusal to be searched, not for the cell phone.
Okay.
So
I
would-
guess
I would hope that the student would make the decision at that point, we'll let them
Right.
get the cell phone and
Will the
take the 3
parent
days.
have an opportunity to override the student there?
I'm sorry.
override the
Would
student.
the parent have the opportunity to override the student to make the right decision?
That's a good question. I would tend to think that it would be good practice to call the parent and say, "I'd like you to know the decision your student's about to make."
Impact,
Yeah.
yeah.
Could we potentially have some more language in there where, again, if you're getting a 45-day suspension for a cell phone, I mean, there are many parents that would come in and tell their student, you're going to be subject to search, whereas the student doesn't always make the right decision. So that impact is 45 days as opposed to 3. I think Mr. Acton has a good point of how do we incorporate that into this process to allow the right potential parental influence of the decision to be made. Certainly, cell phone 3 days versus 45 days seems like a huge lesson where the parent could teach a lesson in another way, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
It's an interesting question. It's an interesting precedent. It would be unlike any other discipline we do, but.
Do we typically get to the point of a search for a cell phone? I mean, is that
You could potentially, if the cell phone was a piece of evidence that
Yeah.
you needed, but
But it-
These
But most
kids
of the
have their rights, they know their rights.
Right.
And concern is where they really don't know what they don't know.
Parent may understand the
Impact.
severity and impact of it as opposed to the student may not understand.
Well, I guess what I'd relate it to is when my experience as an administrator, if, we used to very explicitly have conversations with students that said, if you tell the truth, this is going to be much better for you. If we find out that you're lying, you're going to get a bigger suspension than you would if you told the truth. And sometimes these students would make the unfortunate decision of lying to the principal or an assistant principal and would get a bigger suspension than they would have otherwise. This would almost be akin to that if the parent found out and said, oh, no, wait a minute, shouldn't have lied because you got a bigger suspension. I want you to go in there and tell the truth. And I want you to reduce the suspension because you've now done the right thing.
I struggle with like searching of a car. I mean, that is the parent's car. That's not the kid's car to refuse a search. I mean, there's some extenuating factors there that are.
Well, I do want to say clearly, though, if anybody's watching, if anyone that drives a car on campus, that car
Yes, I
is
agree.
subject to search by
I'm
the
not saying that it's
administration.
not, but I'm just saying the fact that a student would refuse for the parent's car to be searched, it's the parent's car. I would give my consent for my car to be searched. So I'm just saying, like, there's a struggle there with not having the parental involvement.
The message we're trying to send, and I'm open to any feedback. I understand where y'all are coming from. The message we're trying to send is that it's totally unacceptable for any student. I've never had it happen to me in 23 years. Want it to happen again, is what I'll say. And I feel like that message needs to be very strong.
Well, to clarify, I mean, when you get a suspension as long as 45 days, should that actually occur, the student would be in alternative school. They're not just sitting at home for 45 days. I mean, they would
Correct.
still be
It would
getting
be an
educated.
alternative school.
Okay.
Is it probably safe to say we don't want this on the consent agenda?
That's the
This
sense I
one.
got.
Yeah. So,
Yes.
if you'll just place this item on the regular agenda and any questions or clarifications, then we can take up with Dr. Horrell in the
Yes.
coming week.
Yep.
Okay.
Perfect.
All right, next item.
Next item is the 23-24 stipend schedule. And this was one, the stipend schedule was actually approved last month. It was shared a bit too late, I think, for everybody's comfort in the process last month. So we wanted everybody to have the additional month to review it and just make 100% sure everybody was comfortable with it.
Would like to add that to agenda.
All right. Any objection to that? Hearing none, this item on the consent agenda for next week. Next item.
Next item, we've got our 22-23 budget amendments this month. These were brought by Ms. Rosales. This almost entirely deals with our summer camps and the many changes that have repeatedly been made to the summer camp allocation. So if you'll see at the top, that $254,721 is the majority of what you're going to see there.
Objection to placing this item on the consent agenda?
No.
Hearing none.
Next item is discussion action on the LSS job description for athletic director. We'll note that I had some feedback from Mr. Burnett that I would endorse, and I'm happy to share with everybody if y'all would like to hear that. Okay. More bullet points, evaluate coaches and their specific role as coaches. No, I'm sorry, we didn't do evaluate because that was an administrator, I apologize. Provide training and support to coaches to reaffirm the Lakeland school system's expectations. Thought was a great add. And then there was, beginning, was oversee the coordination of athletic facility and assets assets for equitable access for all athletic programs. So essentially, let me try this again. On number 2, this would be split off into 2, direct and manage the district's athletic programs. And then the second one would be oversee coordination of athletic facilities assets for equitable access for all athletic programs. I thought those were both strong and would.
Was the new facilities person, is part of his role to be kind of the scheduling for the spaces, or is that the athletic director?
No, the facilities, I think that's going to be a combination actually of, I think the deputy principal is going to be involved in that. I think the athletic director certainly would be involved in that. The facilities manager will not do scheduling.
Okay.
He would do more repair, maintenance, certainly if
Right.
there was an issue with the athletic facilities, like, something's not working or access.
I think you and I talked about this one, and you listed in the top the primary purposes, the rules of the other applicable athletic governing bodies. It's the current number 3, I guess it would go to number 4. Could we add that wording down there as well, where it says applicable local, state, and federal laws, and possibly add some wording there for governing bodies?
The rules of other applicable
Yes.
athletic governing bodies?
Yes,
Yes.
okay. I know it's in the top, but I think it kind of spells it out again down here, so I just want to make sure it's clear that that's.
Yeah, Ms. Millspawn, what she's talking about. We added a line under the primary purpose. We added the rules of other applicable athletic governing bodies. I'm gonna add that phrase to number 3, yeah.
which will become number 4, I think.
Right.
Based on, okay.
Will, yeah. If you could make a note of that one, that's the one I'm.
Is this when would this person start? Is it a summer, is the person there around the summertime too?
It is
or
not a year-long position the way it's
Okay.
currently.
Half months, is that correct?
It's 10 months.
10 months.
It's a teacher position,
Okay.
essentially.
Is there any more discussion? Go ahead.
There was another item that I'd sent to Dr. Horrell that I just wanted us to discuss a little bit more. On item 23, it says approved tryout plan schedules for all teams. And I had essentially copy and pasted what's in the description that says, let's see, to provide equitable access to students, or opportunity for all students to participate. Dr. Horrell gave me some good pushback to say no. He didn't think, because it seemed to say that we were saying that every student would be allowed to play. And so I appreciate that feedback, but I would like for us to consider something on item 23, because I have gotten feedback from parents, and about there are occasions when I've gotten just direct feedback from parents that say there have been times when our tryout plans didn't seem to indicate that there was equitable access for everyone who was eligible to try out. And it gave at least the appearance that teams were pre-selected before tryouts began. That concerns me greatly. I'd be remiss if I didn't share that, having heard that from, and I've shared that with you before when that happened. I don't think we add my original recommendation to Dr. Horrell, but I just would be reticent if I didn't bring it up for us to consider some wording that adds some strength to that language. Make sure that we're doing so in a way that it doesn't appear to favorites for certain students or certain age groups, or grade levels even, where grade levels are told, well, we'll figure out when your tryouts are at a different time. That's occurred in the past month.
You want to be sure, because the situation you're describing is not uncommon, and that grade levels are treated differently, tryouts have different levels of tryouts, so that's, I guess I would just want to say that that happening to me does not acknowledge that there was something inherently unfair about the process, is the only thing I guess I would add to that statement. I'm certainly happy to clean it up, but I don't want to imply that having grade levels audition on different days is inherently fair.
Right, and
I wouldn't want to suggest that publicly, I guess.
Yeah, and if I gave that impression, that was not my intent. It's just that there was one particular sport where certain grade levels were told, here's your tryout dates, and another grade level was told, we'll figure it out later. That was just, I didn't like the way that appeared. I'm not saying that there was any intent behind it, but it just certainly had the appearance, and I just want to make sure that that's something the athletic director does take into account, whether it's written into here or something that's just shared with staff. Make sure that that's in our practice.
Well, and I guess on that, as far as this position, because this will be a peer position, and I think what you're describing sounds more like, as we discussed with some of the other comments, an administrator position.
Sure.
I think it would be up to an administrator to say you can or can't do that. In this case, the administrator said you can do that, but it wasn't the athletic director. I'd be uncomfortable with the idea that an athletic director, as contemplated here, would say to a coach, you can't have your tryouts that way because of the perception of inequity. I think that would be higher than the pay grade, I guess, as they say
So for a
sometimes.
point of conflict, if some incident like that would happen, it would be routed up to the principal
The
to,
principal or the athletic administrator, or the designee for athletics on the
So they
administrator.
would still approve them, but if they had concerns, then they would share it up.
Yeah, and maybe approve is too strong a word. I mean, with the plan schedules,
Or like,
to
they're
me,
gonna
it's more
consult?
coordinating.
Or, I mean, they would consult and give feedback?
perhaps?
I would think so, and make sure they're not all happening at the same time.
Right.
I mean, keep up with it so that, the lacrosse tryouts aren't the same time as the, soccer tryouts, if you've got students that are gonna do both, or maybe that's not a good example, but, those kind of things. Make sure
Right.
that they're not happening on the same field at the same time. Make sure that, the communications.
I have a question about this one, and so it says approve the, or whatever we rename it to, whether it's, consult or whatever it is. So the schedules for all teams, so when we talk about, rescheduling, which happens a lot for rain events or whatever, would they also be responsible for the rescheduling approvals? So does this also need to add rescheduling, or is that, because when I
Are
hear.
we talking about
sched-
the tryouts or
The
'cause these are
20
tryout plans and schedules, tryout plans and tryout schedules.
Oh, I didn't take it as a tryout schedule. I thought that meant the actual schedule itself. Okay, that's my misunderstanding.
I guess,
Okay, I
you
didn't
could
read
read
it
it a
like
couple
that.
ways, to be fair.
Yeah, I didn't read the
Yeah.
tryout followed the word schedules, or went before the word schedule, so I just didn't read it that way. I thought they were actually approving the schedule for the team, like meaning this team is on this field on this day, and this team is on this field on this day, and that's what I thought that was contemplating, so I guess I misunderstood
I
that.
think I read
I
that.
may be
in the-
wrong.
In the previous one, though, what will become
Yeah.
the new number.
That was the question,
3.
that was my question.
21 says make certain all athletic schedules are created in a satisfactory and timely manner. To
Yeah.
me, that's the schedules, and
Yeah.
23 is
Yeah.
tryout plans and schedules.
I had a question about that specifically. Well, I had 2 questions. So the first one, just to clarify, all the coaches would report to the athletic administrator or principal or principal. This person, or this position, would be, it sounds more like a coordinator, I guess? Is
Yeah,
that a better word?
this
Okay,
person
and
is
then-
supposed to make things happen
Okay.
that need to happen, but when it comes to supervising, evaluating, conflict, that was some of the conversation that Mr. Burnett and I think helpfully to.
Okay,
kinda
so
work through that.
along with the coordination, I guess, who will be doing that job in the summer? Because I didn't realize it was just the 10 months. So who would be stepping in to fill this role during the summertime? Because as we know, there are a lot of tryouts, there are a lot of open fields, there's a lot of weightlifting. There are kids everywhere. So like, who fills this role in the
There is
other-
a
the interim?
stipend associated with this role, and so those kind of extras would be part of the stipend. I mean, it says that, however,
Okay,
it's
so
a,
this role.
the AD maintains a variable schedule and works the required hours to meet the duties and responsibilities
All
of this
right, so
position.
then to clarify, it's a
Yeah.
10-month position, but you're getting this role will get a stipend to assist with some of the after hours and the.
So I would assume as
Okay,
needed.
Okay, just
Yeah.
trying to clarify how that's gonna work, okay.
It says other duties as assigned by the principal or superintendent. That-
It also says that,
Is the
yeah.
Of course,
catch-all.
but, yeah, this role does have some summertime.
And to that point, the part you read, Dr. Horrell, where it says, may include evening, weekend work, would it be appropriate to say, and some summer work?
We could certainly add that.
I mean, and I'm just asking that, what do you think about that? I'm good either way, but I like to be able to read the job description and know exactly what's my expectations.
Well, I do want to, unless the board wants to revisit, it as a position with more months. I don't want to do a bait and switch on anybody either. I mean, I don't want to say, we're going to tell this person it's a 10-month position, you're going to make, basically a teacher salary with a stipend. To me, there is some extra, money approved, but
Who is the athletic administrator in this case?
right now, it's Mr. Cool.
Okay.
I mean, I guess that's up to you. I was just trying to see if the person is not, if this role is not who's doing it in the summer, who is doing it, because someone has to do it in the summer, because otherwise you've got, teams scheduling the fields at the same time, you've got rescheduling with rainouts even in the summer with open, practice, and you've got trials. So I was just trying to clarify who is doing it in the summer. I'm not trying to
No, I don't.
make a
no, I
suggestion
no, I
on
think
who
it's-
it
I think
should
it's a
be.
great
I just
thought. I
wanted
mean,
to
to me,
understand.
typically, and I know that, typically and ideally don't always or ever come to mind. I mean, we're talking about 8 weeks in the summer. My hope would be that whoever does have summer practices that are, you know, being allowed, or camps or things, that you get all those things lined up before everybody goes out to the summer, and then you turn it over to the principal. The principal's 12 months, the deputy principal's 12 months. I mean, there shouldn't be as much, certainly, as there is during the school year. There are certainly a lot of activities. I know football goes all summer, but most of that stuff, at least in my experience, doesn't require a high level of day-to-day kind of
You take the
maintenance
competition
and
out of it in the summer. You don't
check
have
out.
the competitive, part of the whole thing.
You do, and there's a number of dead periods in the summer where,
Right.
there's just not as many things.
Does anybody have any objection to putting, with the changes that we've discussed, putting this on the consent agenda? Would y'all rather, I
I
don't know.
need to see the changes.
Okay.
Yeah,
So then
we'll
we'll
bring
leave this
that
item on
back.
the
Yeah.
regular
Yeah.
agenda.
Pretty quick, but I'd rather leave it on the regular.
Right.
The part about applicable athletic governing bodies was up in the purpose, and you were just wanting to add it to number 3, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
so it's
So
referred
it's
to.
both places.
Okay.
The next item.
The next item is discussion action on the update to 22-23 school fees list, which I know sounds wild because we're just about to get out of this thing. But what we're adding to this is a required fee for credit recovery in the summer.
I'd like to add this to the consent agenda.
This item will go on the consent agenda for next week. Next item.
Next item is the 23-24 school fees list, and this will not be the last time we revisit this one, but this is just kind of kickstart it, get some of those fees established for next year. I will note that we had a good question from Ms. Childs about some of these that just said, for example, boys soccer fee. It does not distinguish between middle school and high school on that, and I inquired about that, and the thought was that if you set it at not to exceed $450, lid on it, what it's saying is that the middle school and the high school could both potentially set their fees up to $450. So I did want to be clear about that. That was the question from Ms. Childs. I think she's technically correct on that. But that was the intention of the principal, to recommend those, to give that flexibility.
I don't have a problem with that, but I do have a question from a rev track perspective. How does that work if they set it lower than the amount? Is that something they coordinate locally with the school with the financial secretary to change that amount to the lower amount? Like, let's say middle school says it's a $250 instead of whatever. So they work with the financial secretary at the school to get it correct in rev track? Is that?
That's right. And one of the things I noted to Ms. Childs is very few people ever see this list. Like, this is, it's almost not a list of the actual fees. I mean, so the middle school, if the middle school boys soccer team says our fee's $300, they're gonna work with the middle school financial secretary, because it's split off now, and say, here's our fee, it's $300, and she will load it in as $300.
Okay,
Yeah.
got it.
I apologize for not asking you this one earlier,
Yeah.
and I should have. The volleyball fee says $250. It doesn't say not to exceed $250.
Several of them do.
That's what they requested in that
and so
case,
they
yeah.
just
In some
want to
cases, they
set
wanted
that.
to leave some headroom, I think. In some cases, they knew exactly what they wanted it to be. Yeah. And if I come back next month and bring you not to exceed 400, then we'll
Then
know
we'll do that.
they had a change of heart, yeah.
Okay.
Objection to this being on the consent agenda?
I was looking at National Elementary Honor Society and National Junior Honor Society, so that's in anticipation of, well, it's NJHS at LPS, right? But it'll be
Yes.
National Honor Society when they're eligible for.
Correct.
Correct,
That's right,
okay.
yeah.
So we'll have a third one, okay.
Third layer, yeah.
And that starts in 10th grade, right?
National Honor Society, I think, is 11th and 12th graders, I think.
The consent agenda? All right. Consent agenda it is. Next item.
Next item is 23-24 textbook fines. These are unchanged.
Consent
In
agenda.
memoriam.
Consent agenda. Everyone fine with that?
Yeah.
All right. Consent agenda for that one. Next item.
Next item is the 10th grade curriculum materials. There's extensive documentation there and links to that out. And I want to especially thank Ms. Decker, who did the lion's share of the work on kind of gathering those materials, but also had input certainly from Ms. Deloso and the Carrie Eldridge, the Cleveland High School instructional supervisor.
Would prefer to leave this on the regular agenda if there's no objection. All right, we'll leave this item on the regular agenda. Next item.
Next item is the 23-24 school board calendar.
Concerns with meeting date?
I have a concern. I do this every year. I do
Yes.
this every year.
It's the October one or the?
No, it's the
spring
September,
one?
the
Oh.
September 11th one that is always winds up being during the, I think one year it wasn't, but it usually winds up being during the TOS conference in Gatlinburg. So I would not be present on September 11th day. And I looked at,
What about the 12th or the 18th? Is there, or, oh, I guess the conference would be that whole week, right? Or most of that week?
yeah, the 12th wouldn't work, the 18th would. I think that's what I checked.
Or I guess we could also look at the 5th. The 7th, I believe. Oh,
Pull this back up, I'm sorry.
was the 5th an option? Did you have
The 5th is the day after Labor Day. Yes, the 5th is an option. So the 5th or the 18th or,
As far as spacing of meetings, just looking at it, the 5th looks like the favorable in my opinion. I don't know if the board has any, just for spacing
Yeah, I'm fine.
yeah, that probably works.
any objection to changing it to the 5th? And any other conflicts or concerns at this point?
New guy asking the question, questions?
It's so we can discuss and work through a lot of the items that maybe need more extensive discussion. There are some months that they fall on like Labor Day or July 4th, or that we know there's gonna be a problem with getting at least 3 of us here, especially like sometimes it becomes a problem in the summer months where we'll have to cancel them. Like March is spring break, so we could technically do work session the 1st, and then third week we could do a business meeting. But in general, it's for us to go in more depth discussion. Potentially, next year, I might ask that we look at our annual agenda and see if there's any items that maybe need further discussion or might have more in-depth discussion at certain times of the year. So that we can work through and give Dr. Horrell direction, kind of things like that we want to change before the business meeting, so we're not trying to evaluate them on the fly necessarily, and we can get more background material on certain items. I think that's the best way to. We can always put this on any future agenda if there's a conflict that comes up with anybody's schedule or whatever. Certainly not opposed to that at all. So the one change was September to the 5th. Any objection with that change, putting it on the consent agenda? All right, hearing none, that will go on the consent agenda.
Next item, I'm going to take them, the next two I'm going to take as a piece, if that's okay. That's the Internal Control Manual and the Uniform Grant Guidance, or the UGG manual, affectionately known as. Again, Ms. Rosales is the mastermind behind both of those primarily, but those kind of dictate and document our internal processes, and they do a great job. It's a great job. The team does a great job with those.
Discussion, concerns, issues with placing this item on the consent agenda? Both of these
Both
items?
yeah.
Hearing none, these items will be placed on the consent agenda. Next item.
Next item is discussion action on updates to the LSS Facilities Use Agreement.
This hasn't been reviewed and updated since, is it 2019? So it's been reviewed, but I don't think it's been updated, actually, since 2019. Does that sound right?
I don't think it's been reviewed by the board since 2019. I will share just generally, I guess, the overview on some of the feedback on this. I will note it's been been noted, and I would tend to agree, that the fee schedule set on this is quite low in terms of the hourly fee. We've got items, cafeteria, if you're using the kitchen, it's $12. If you're not using the kitchen, it's $6. That's per hour. There's also been some feedback generally about, it's noted that during the day, the hours that these things are available for rent typically are Monday through Friday I think it's from 8 to, 11 p.m. or something, that they would generally be available, and whether that's that we want to consider as far as outside organizations using the facilities during the actual school day. There are a number of spaces that are not specifically called out. In some cases, I think that's for good reason currently, and kind of at the desire of the board. For example, the auditorium is not currently on the list, and we've had some informal conversations about not making the auditorium available until we have a better sense of what our own internal scheduling is. So it's really, this is truly here, not that we have all the answers for it tonight, but just to open it up. If board members have any specific feedback for the next meeting, you can certainly discuss it tonight, but this might also be a to be continued thing. And it is a living document and can be updated at any point. This is not part of the annual agenda. Number of things there to contemplate.
Go ahead.
And Dr. Hurl, one of my comments to you, I think I didn't clearly state it. On the cafeterias, it's elementary/middle schools. Really, I think what I'd like to say is let's change it to say LES and LPS. Have a high school cafeteria too, right?
Yes.
So we're missing that if we don't say that. So if we change those two items to say LES and /LPS, then we're catching everything.
Yeah.
Three different
Yeah,
spaces.
well,
Because the high
But
school,
there-
and there's no kitchen, there's no with kitchen option, basically, at the high
Right.
school.
But what I thought I heard you say was if they were using the kitchen, would be one fee. If they didn't want to use the kitchen, it would be a different one.
Right, so under cafeterias, the elementary/middle schools, if they're using the kitchen, either at LES or the LPS middle school side, then it's 12, 16, or 48.
Right.
In those two, if they're not using the kitchen, they're just using the space, it's 6, 8, and 24.
Right.
So right now, the LPS high school cafeteria is not called out there.
Or in the gymnasiums
Yes.
section, so.
Right, and we talked about, again, just individually kind of keeping those off limits. That's really been my intention for this first year, is to not offer those up for use outside of the city programs, but by an MOU.
I mean, I would look at the group 3, group 4, and group 5 charges on the elementary, middle schools and say that is way too low for potential impact. I'd like for us to consider raising those or just not having those accessible for those groups outside of the MOU, as you mentioned, or any school organization. I think those 3 groups represented nonprofits. Some were inside of the city, some were outside of the city.
That's right.
Okay.
My feedback, already at least on during the school day, I couldn't think of a situation where we would, especially given our school safety discussions, where we would rent out space during the school day. So I would certainly be in favor of taking that section out where it references 6:30 a.m. to 11 p.m. or some, whatever that, I would be in favor of taking that out, and not spelling out a time frame. Leave it within the discussion.
Would we like to spell out that they will not be available for rent during the school day, or during any hours when school is in session?
I think that's a terrific idea.
Also echo that
As Thomas said.
the fees, I do feel like they should go up based on at least some of the feedback we've gotten from other people on fees. I think that they certainly need to go up. So I think we should keep this item on the regular agenda and certainly review it, continue to give feedback on items. And if you get any more feedback from the others on other municipalities on their agreement or on their current ones, their facility fees and things like that, so we can make sure we're benchmarking and being reasonable certainly, but making sure we're charging appropriate amounts too, that
Yep.
it's the current market bears.
All right, I'm hearing permission to go up pretty significantly on those columns to reflect.
And I think the difference in the group 5 is warranted because that's an outside
Yes.
of Lakeland organization. So I do think that merits a look at a higher rate.
Okay.
I will echo, I have also said to Dr. Hoare repeatedly, I feel like we do not have a good handle on what our needs will be, at least for the next
I agree.
several years, because these programs are growing, and they're actually growing by leaps and bounds, probably faster than we expected them to. So until the admin can get their hands around it, I certainly would not want to put one more wrench in their situation to where they're having to, okay, I gotta figure out how to rent this out too, and have it open to outside groups. Let them focus on getting these programs right, getting our facilities use right, so that practices there and everywhere, because as we all have seen, there's so many people on campus all the time, just the kids and their programs, so I certainly would not wanna throw that on the admin at this point in time as well, to open up any other spaces than what we currently have.
Well, we have one high school grade right now.
Yes.
And it's amazing if you're on campus, you know, you have a meeting, you show up and you're not sure which space it's in, and there are people in all the spaces.
Right.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
Yep.
So I have I have said that, so I'll go on
She has,
record
yep.
as saying that as well, that I certainly would not want to do that to our school admin at this point in
no,
time.
no.
Yeah, that's what I was just gonna say, is that, I echo what Ms. Chairman Harrison said about just really don't understand what we're gonna need. I mean, I know, soccer team was weightlifting, and the, you know, basketball refs all of a sudden need to change clothes in there. I mean, not that we're renting that out, but it's just still trying to figure all that out, and we have one grade. And the other thing is, it does make me a little nervous about, like, I feel like our staff are constantly asked to do more and more and more, and then say, oh, well, this group wants to rent out, so, you know, you have to work on Sunday. I don't know.
Well, and
That
I'll-
makes me nervous too.
I'll note, for context, I think agreements like this came to be because there was a long time where schools were considered to be underutilized. Were buildings that if it wasn't, you know, 8 to 3 or 9 to 4 or 7 to 2, exception of a couple of sports, particularly in elementary and middle schools, they were thought to be underutilized. They were thought to be, these are taxpayer, you know, built and maintained buildings, and it's only fair for the community to be able to, at a reasonable price, come use them. That's not the situation, certainly at Lakeland Preparatory School.
Right.
I mean, it is the least underutilized building I've ever seen, and there's
With
only
one grade.
there's only ninth grade there.
One high school.
We even got the central office down in an unused wing. But I mean, it really, I mean, I really do think that's, a lot of this is, that was from legacy Shelby County, and the
Yeah.
reality was, if you had an elementary school or middle school, and it was not in school, it was just sitting there. And sometimes it was sitting there burning some lights and having, you know, at least enough HVAC use to kind of keep it from being moldy or, you know, frozen. And so I think this comes up, well, we should offer this up. So I'm not a proponent on this, but maybe it's the elephant in the room, and I'll just say it. It's possible you don't rent it out to anybody that's not, you know, covered by the MOU, you know, or the direct relationship with the city. So I'm just throwing out the extreme to say, you don't have to. There's no, that I'm aware, there's no law requiring it, and I don't even know, particularly at LPS, that it would be viewed as unreasonable to say, we just can't.
It makes me nervous with the whole safety situation of just more and more people that are in the building, and we only have like one staff, and then one staff has to come in on a weekend and they're already overworked. That's the part that makes me nervous, because I mean, in an ideal world, oh sure, you know, we wouldn't have to have a staff here and people could just use it and everything would be great, but we have liability and we have safety concerns and work staff, and so that part just, I don't know, it makes me uncomfortable with it.
Well, it's not, we're not a for-profit, you know, it's not like
Right.
we need this to help, you know, fill our coffers or anything, so, and I also think these brand-new spaces, and we've got an elementary school that because of the care that has been exercised there, everybody's been such a good steward of that space, that space looks, it does not look its age.
No.
And I am very concerned that anybody who uses these spaces might not have our same level of care, and you don't know that until they've used the space, and then you have to fix what's or misused, so.
My notes.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
All right, next item, we have two under the same item, the 23-24 LPS Protected Reading List and the 23-24 LES Protected Reading List. And just to review, although I know the board's familiar with this, the Protected Reading List is basically when a grade level of teachers, typically English teachers, says, this is the pool of novels that we intend to study, either excerpts from or in their entirety, and we want to make sure that that students aren't running into the same novels, laterally throughout their educational experience. So that's really the intention. There are significant changes to this, and I think what we're finding is that the groups of novels or the number of novels that they're requesting is increasing, and some of that is because they are doing shorter, close reads on these novels possibly than just doing the entire novel study. So I don't want to give the impression that every English class is going to do every one of these novels and that's all they're going to do, but this is the consensus of the group. There were a number of background notes that were shared with the board members for additional context, particularly with new novels, although in some cases they were just moving them from place to place.
Question on this item?
I have one.
Go ahead.
Could we have the team look again at, and then there were none? It's on the 8th grade list.
Yes, absolutely.
This item on the regular agenda, and please have any more items that you want. The Dr. Horler as well.
Yep.
I appreciate the enormity of this work also. This was a huge undertaking.
Lee Nelson and Carrie Eldridge, our instructional supervisors, kind of take the lead on that and did a great job.
Mm-hmm.
Is it fine, I don't know that I clarified, for the was that just LPS? Did we want to do the LES too, or was there any discussion on the LES one? I just want to make sure that it was just the LPS one.
That was the only one I saw on LPS.
Okay.
I did not have a note on the LE.
And so the LES item will stay on the regular agenda as well. Is that? I'm sorry.
Both on the regular, no, you want LES on consent, right?
Yes,
Oh,
sorry, I
yes.
said that wrong.
Consent out.
Yes, I said that
You got
wrong.
it, you got it.
All right. I don't see any more, sorry, policy manual,
She made a note about 6.313,
6.313.
and that may just be a discussion point related to number 2, which would be a cross-reference.
Right.
I'm not-
And
I don't wanna
perhaps,
speak for you.
perhaps an addition of language at tier 4, if that's what everybody seems
Yeah.
to think is appropriate.
I think we're going to add that to the agenda, 6.313. Even if we don't wind up making any changes, we'll take a look at it.
Okay,
Yeah.
and I have nothing else from my policy team.
Okay, great. Thank you for doing that.
Is there any other items? There's no other items on the agenda, is there any? None, are there any announcements?
I will note that I'm going to be going to the Ames Conference, which is the Association of Independent and Municipal Schools. I'll be leaving tomorrow evening, and we'll be back Thursday evening. I will be off on Friday because I'm going to see Taylor Swift with my niece and my brother in Nashville. So I will be leaving tomorrow, and we'll be back.
You have a
Just
great
wanted you
weekend
to
in
know.
Nashville.
Well, thank you.
If you see my daughter, tell her hi.
I was going to say, I think there's some others.
So I do have one, is anybody else on the board? So I do have one announcement. It is Teacher Appreciation Week. So I want to make sure we
Thank
give a
you.
big shout out to our teachers, that we appreciate everything they do every day.
And principals.
Well, we,
Principals Day today.
is it? When, okay, I missed that notice. I haven't been on Facebook much. So, but Teacher Appreciation Week, so go appreciate your teachers in whatever appropriate way. A card goes a long way, handwritten by the student is huge to these teachers. So any way that you feel appropriate, please recognize your teachers, or all of them, or that one special one that has made a difference in your kid's life, or all of that.
You can't tell them enough, for
no,
sure.
you cannot tell
No, you
them that.
can't.
The other thing I will just remind the board is the annual training deadline. I got my notice, just reminding me, I had actually done it, but they didn't have a record of it, so just make sure you're on top of your annual notice, and you should have gotten a copy of your transcript to make sure it's updated, so make sure you do that before the end of June, right? Isn't that the deadline? End of June. And if everybody would start looking at your training schedules for next year too, I think they've already released the, because I know some people have been through some of the training, so it becomes harder to make sure you get ones that you haven't been to before. I ran into that this year, so make sure you're just staying on top of that, because some of them happen earlier in the year, for those that have been through several of the classes. And that's all I've got. Is there a motion to adjourn? We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? We are adjourned.
Did the stream.